Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoyed this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Leslie took the chair and placed it by the table. This particular seat was reserved for the deceased son who had died several years ago. The woman stroked the back of the chair affectionately, and as she heard the voice of her daughter, who said, "Mama, you are in your repertoire. You put the chair up for Harry again. You know that you are already considered a little strange by your acquaintances and neighbors, that for so many years you have been preparing a chair for Harry at every celebration. Mommy, you know very well that Harry is long gone and this chair will not bring him back to life. Daughter, it makes me feel better. It's like Harry's with us. It's your birthday today, and I imagine that my son is happy for you and sits with everyone at this table. You go and get dressed up. The guests will be here soon, and I'm going to Harry's room to sit. You'll probably reminisce again." "That's all you ever go in there for," said Betty, who was 19 today, sadly. Leslie said nothing to her daughter, and the woman silently went to her son's room, where she sat down on the bed and looked at the furnishings, which she had not touched since her son's death. And then her gaze fell on Harry's desk book. It was a collection of poems. The woman smiled involuntarily. She knew that it was her son's favorite poet, and he often read her poems. Leslie turned the book in her hands and thought. Her own thoughts took her to the past. The woman did not resist the memories and slowly began to remember her life, where there were many joyful moments and tragic events. Leslie was born in the village and was the only child in the family. Parents brought up the girl in strictness. When Leslie finished 11 grades, she told her family that she would go to teachers' college. She dreamed of being a teacher of literature and Russian language from childhood. Parents did not object and blessed the daughter, but before leaving the girl's mother, Kathy seriously talked to Leslie. The woman said to her daughter, "You and your father let go to study, and not on Golgi. So be kind to get an education and do not shame me and my dad. Do not look at the guys. They at this age only serve one thing, and you know what I'm talking about." "Mom, you know how quiet I am. I don't think I'll ever meet a guy with my shy nature, so don't worry about me. All in good time. And you'll find your own man. The main thing is to keep your honor, because that's the kind of girl they look for in a wife. I think that you will not lose your head, your father, and I brought you up strictly," Kathy said admonitively. Soon Leslie entered college and began to learn new sciences. The girl was interested in learning other subjects. She devoted most of her leisure time to reading books. Her friends in the dormitory called her a nibbler. The girl knew about it, but she was not offended at all. A couple of months of study, as her mother called and said that her father was hit by a car, and he died without regaining consciousness in the hospital. The girl immediately left for the village, where the funeral was soon held. Leslie, along with her mother, severely experienced the death of a native man. After the funeral, the girl again went to the city to study. She promised her mother that she would call more often, and at the same time she asked her mother to take care of herself. Kathy only nodded in response and fixed the hair on her daughter's head. Leslie came to the city and continued her studies, and one day her roommates suggested going to the movies. The girl at first refused, but the students insisted, and she agreed. After the movie, the buddies decided to walk a little, and they were approached by 3 guys to get acquainted. Leslie resolutely refused and told her friends that this is the end of her walk and she is going to the dormitory. Upon hearing this, one of the young men turned to the girl. "Why are you so scared? We just want to walk and chat. There's nothing wrong with that." The speech of the guy whose name was John embarrassed Leslie, and she unexpectedly agreed to walk. The company walked for a while, and then the young man escorted the girls to the dormitory. And here John asked Leslie for a phone number. She did not refuse the request. The guy the next day called and set a date. and soon the couple was already walking around the city. The girl learned that the man is 26 years old, works as a carpenter. Leslie in turn told about himself. And from that day the couple began to meet. It was a week after the acquaintance, as John escorted the girl to the dormitory, wanted to kiss her. Leslie scared him away and said, "What do you think you're doing? Without a year or week of acquaintance and you're kissing. What's wrong with that?" Perplexed, asked John, and suddenly slapped himself on the forehead and with a smile continued to talk. "I didn't realize it right away. I understand you are still a virgin. It is very wonderful. At your age, for a long time, young ladies jump into bed with guys. Honestly, you surprised me. I won't insist." A few days after the incident, John suggested that the girl go to his place. Leslie agreed without any trick, especially since she liked the guy. The couple passed into the apartment as the man began to shower Leslie with passionate kisses. The girl tried to push the young man away and asked him to stop. However, John did not listen to Leslie and continued his actions, and after a while, he possessed the guest against her will. The girl after that quietly cried and cursed herself for trusting a man. And the guy at this time, quite smiling and without any remorse, told his partner that he really liked everything. Leslie, after these words, jumped up and loudly exclaimed, "What a scoundrel you are! You used your power to satisfy your ego, and you knew perfectly well that I have not yet had an intimate relationship with a man. You're just an animal." The girl swiftly dressed and jumped out of the apartment. She ran towards the dormitory and dreamed of one thing, that her roommates would not be there. Leslie didn't want her buddies to know what had happened, and for that she needed to remove her torn blouse. Leslie was lucky as the roommates were not in the room. They were still out for a walk. The girl grabbed a robe and ran to the shower. After this incident, 2 days passed, and only then John called Leslie and proposed to meet. She quietly asked the interlocutor to never call her again and generally forget about her existence. The man chuckled in response and disconnected the connection. Roommates noticed that Leslie, no longer in the evenings, does not go on dates to the chosen one. Halls asked why she stopped communicating with the guy. The girl had nothing to say, but only that she quarreled with John without further reconciliation. Classmates tried to find out the reason for the rift, but Leslie did not respond to further inquiries. Time moved leisurely on, and one day the girl suddenly felt bad. She had been nauseous since the morning, and she thought she might have eaten a stale pie in the cafeteria yesterday. Leslie hoped that the next day she would feel better, but it did not happen. When the doctor heard the symptoms, he suggested that the patient go to a women's clinic. The girl visited the gynecologist, and the doctor told her that she was pregnant. Leslie looked at the woman in a white coat with horror and said, "This can't be. How could this happen? Strange you, my dear. Were you in bed with a man? And from this very often children are born. So do not make surprised eyes," said the doctor. The girl left the clinic at a loss. She did not know how to be in this situation. Her plans did not include giving birth to a child from a man whom she hated with all her heart after the incident. But Leslie also knew that gynecologists do not advise to terminate the first pregnancy. The young woman came to the dormitory and fell down on the bed. She wanted to cry, but there were no tears. The girl just lay there and thought about what she should do in this situation. She realized that she did not have much time to think about it. The doctor informed her about it and said that she had a month to terminate the pregnancy. A week passed after Leslie learned that she was expecting a child. The young woman realized that she needed to make a decision, and the girl decided to go to her mother in the village for a few days. To do this, she wrote an application in college that she was released from her studies for a week, and then the next day left for the village. Kathy met her daughter with a worried face, because before the end of the first year was still a month. The woman, as soon as Leslie entered the house, she immediately said sternly, "What do you mean?" "Mammy, you calm down. Let's just talk calmly. You see, I'm pregnant and I have very little time to solve the issue. Don't ask about the baby's father. He's a scoundrel." "Yeah, how could you? You came here to embarrass me. You'll bring it in your hem, and what will the townspeople say? You can guess." At least my father won't see the shame. I didn't expect you to jump into bed with a man, Katie said. Mom, you've got it all wrong. I didn't mean it, and John did. Mommy, I need your advice on what to do now because this is my first pregnancy. You can berate me, scold me, but just don't push me away now, her daughter said, crying. Katie looked at her girl sternly for a few minutes, and then she couldn't stand it and hugged her. The woman realized that now Leslie should be supported, and it was too late to scold her, as the past could not be returned. The mistress of the house calmed her daughter as much as she could, and then asked her, "How do you feel about your baby in the belly? This is the most important thing now, and only after that you should make a decision." Mommy, I have a new life in my belly, and you know, every day I want the baby to come into the world more and more. I'm pretty sure it's gonna be a boy. You've answered your own question about what you should do next. And the village gossip you and I will somehow survive, said the woman and furtively brushed away a tear. Sometime later, Leslie gave birth to her first child. She gave birth to a strong baby boy, whom she named Harry. The young woman was unspeakably happy that she now had a son. Rejoiced at this event, and Kathy, although she was worried about her daughter, as she knew how the village treats women who gave birth out of wedlock. A year passed as Harry was born, and Leslie's mother advised her to resume her studies. The girl rejected this idea, as she did not want to part with her son. She explained to her mother that let Harry grow up to 3 years old, and then it will be seen about the training. Soon the boy turned 3 years old, and Kathy again started talking about college. However, Leslie again refused the offer. The girl told her mother, "Now it is necessary to give Harry to a kindergarten, so that he is in contact with other children, and this is an unnecessary expense. You yourself realize that if I start studying, we can barely make ends meet, as you have a small pension, and I will receive a meager scholarship. I'd rather get a job as a salesman and start bringing income to the family. But you dreamed of becoming a teacher, and now you want to forget about your desire completely. Mommy, I have a son now, and I have to take care of him. Tomorrow I will go to register Harry in kindergarten, and at the same time I will run through the stores about the job," said her daughter. After a while, Leslie registered the boy in the kindergarten. She could not get a job in a store as salesmen were not required. But the girl was lucky. She was hired as a postmistress. Leslie was happy about this employment, as it was not easy to find work in the village. 6 months passed. The young woman carried the mail, and in the evening she took care of her son and helped her mother with the household chores. Kathy saw that her daughter was devoting herself only to her child and did not think about her personal life. However, the pensioner realized that it would be difficult to find a husband for Leslie in the village. So once started a conversation on this topic. She said to the girl, "You lead a reclusive life. You were invited to the graduation party, so you found a ridiculous reason to refuse. Daughter, you have to think of yourself, and Harry needs a father. I realize that it's hard to find a good man in the village, because decent men have been married for a long time and there are only drunkards left. I suggest that you go to the city, get a job there as a salesman, and rent an apartment, and maybe you'll find happiness there. I'll stay in the village with Harry until you're settled in. I've thought of that, but I don't want to leave my son. And how are you going to manage here on your own, with a small child and a vegetable garden? Don't worry about me. I'm strong." Leslie did not argue, and after a while she left for the city. The girl rented a one-room apartment on the outskirts of the city and got a job in a small store. And soon she already took her son to her. Leslie was glad that she listened to her mother, because in the city you could at least go somewhere with Harry on weekends, and in the village there were no such privileges. 5 years flew by as the young woman lived in a new place. During this time, the boy has already gone to school and practiced in the chess club. Leslie during these years has not been able to arrange her personal life. Men tried to court the girl, but only when it came to intimacy, she immediately broke off all relationships. Leslie realized that it all happens because John at one time took her by force and she cannot forget about her nasty feelings after that day. Kathy was very worried that her daughter still lives alone with her son and cannot arrange her life. And once again, when Leslie came to visit, the pensioner asked her, "You have been living in the city for so many years. Has not a single guy tried to court you? You're not ugly, and you have a nice figure. So why don't you choose a worthy man to marry you?" "Mom, there are suitors, but I'm not ready," said the young woman, and told her mother the real reason why she cannot continue the relationship with a man. Kathy, when she heard this, looked thoughtfully at her daughter and sadly said, "If in your life got a lousy guy, then you should not equal all men in the same comb. It seems to me that you just haven't met a man who will make you think only of him. Maybe you're right not to throw yourself at the first guy you meet." A couple of years passed after that conversation, and Leslie was coming home after work when she got a phone call. It was her mother's neighbor who said that Katie had been taken to the district hospital with a heart attack. The young woman shrieked and thanked her interlocutor. She accelerated her steps to call her boss at home and ask him to let her go to the village for a few days. The young woman was so excited that she did not notice how she jumped out onto the roadway, where there was no crosswalk. And then she heard the squeal of brakes and the indignant voice of the driver, who said, "Young lady, have you had enough of life? Just a little more and under the wheels hit. What are you thinking about?" Leslie looked at the stranger with fright and tried to apologize, but she managed to say only something unintelligible. The man looked at the girl with incomprehension and said, "Are you deaf? Mute? I can talk. I'm just very scared." The woman replied faintly, "Actually, I was a little scared too, because it's not every day that I have pretty girls throwing themselves under my wheels. All right, get in the car. I'll take you where you need to go. I just don't want you to give another driver a heart attack," the stranger said more gently. The girl wanted to refuse the offer, but the interlocutor looked at her sternly and threatened her with his index finger, like a little girl who had done something wrong. It was this gesture that somehow made Leslie obey, and as soon as she was in the car, she suddenly cried and told the man what had happened to her mother. The stranger listened silently to the passenger and then took out a handkerchief and handed it to the girl. The young woman thanked him and gave him her address. The driver nodded and drove off, while Leslie nervously crumpled the handkerchief in her hands. The man noticed it and said in a calm voice, "Calm down. Your mom will be fine. I don't just say anything. Now, let's get acquainted. My name is Anthony, but you can just call me Anthony. Don't forget to tell me right away how you're going to get to your village tomorrow. I'm Leslie. There's an early morning bus, but I've got to go to the local hospital, and I've got a lot of things to do today, to call at work, and also to inform my son's class teacher that he will miss school for a few days. I can't leave him here alone," the woman said, not knowing why she was giving this new acquaintance such details about herself. "Make your calls right now. Tomorrow I will personally take you and your son where you need to go. It's my day off," he said. Leslie looked at the man uncertainly and asked him if his wife would mind that he was going to drive a woman he didn't know to her business. Anthony smiled in response and said that he had been divorced for several years and was therefore free to do whatever his soul desired. Then, at the same moment, he asked the girl if she was married or not. Leslie shook her head negatively. Soon the car arrived at its destination. The girl thanked the driver once again and wanted to get out of the car, as the new acquaintance asked her to give her phone number and reminded her that he would pick her and her son up at 9 in the morning. Leslie complied with the man's request and thanked him once again. The next day, Anthony called at the beginning of 8 and reminded the woman that he would soon be waiting for her and her son near the entrance. The girl, after a short phone call with a smile, thought about Anthony. She did not even understand why she could so easily agree to go with him to the village, and then to the district center. Soon Leslie, together with Harry, sat in the car, and the man slowly told her about himself. He told her that he worked as a cab driver, lived in a 2-room apartment, which was inherited from his parents. He is 36 years old, and he dreams to create a family, but he does not succeed. The girl smiled at the last words of Anthony because she, as well as he also had no luck in relationships with the opposite sex. However, she did not say this aloud, but asked the driver, "And why no luck with women?" "You ask a tricky question, young lady. Somehow I will answer, but not at the moment. You better tell me about you and your son. I see that your boy is growing so serious, he won't even say a word," said Anthony. The drive to the village took several hours. As soon as Leslie came home, she hastily put down her bags and then went to her neighbor's house to find out everything about her mother. Only then did she go back to Anthony and tell him where to go. Leslie checked on her mother with Harry and scolded the patient. Katie smiled in return and asked her not to worry about her, and she asked how much her daughter had come to visit. The young woman answered honestly that she had. The mom sighed sadly and said brokenly, "What a pity it's so little. And I'm in the hospital. I can't even bake pies for my grandson." "Mommy, do not worry if necessary. Harry and I will stay with you. You main thing recover." After that, Leslie and her son left the hospital, where Anthony was waiting for them. The man immediately said that now he would take them to the village, and he himself would go home, because the way was not close. And then he suggested that as soon as Leslie was going to go to town, she should call him, and he would come for them. The young woman was pleased with her new acquaintance's concern, but she was embarrassed that Anthony was helping her. And at the same moment, Leslie blurted to herself and awkwardly said, "I must be a stupid person. I should thank you in some way. You spent gasoline in your time. How much do I owe you for this favor?" "Oh, woman, are you crazy? Are you trying to bribe me? I was doing it out of the goodness of my heart, and you almost ruined my mood with your offer of money," Anthony said, with an ostentatious indignation. The girl was embarrassed by these words and apologized. The man laughed and told her that he would forgive her only if she gave him a cup of tea before he left. The young woman smiled and offered to hurry to the village. Soon Anthony left. The girl did not want to part with the man. She spent the rest of the day thinking about her new acquaintance, remembering how he spoke, how he looked at her. It seemed to her that she had known this man for quite a long time. A few days flew by, and Leslie was about to return to the city. She had been thinking for a long time whether or not to call the man to come and pick her up from the village, and came to the conclusion that it was not worth imposing her communication, since during these days Anthony never called once and did not ask how she was doing. The young woman returned to the city together with her son. The girl promised her mother that she would soon come to visit her again. Kathy kissed her grandson and daughter goodbye and said that she would be looking forward to their arrival. Leslie returned to the city and her life continued onward. She looked sadly at the phone display every day and secretly longed for a call from Anthony. But a week passed, and then the second week ended, and the girl did not expect that she would hear at least once more the voice of this man. Suddenly in the evening, the call rang. It was Anthony who immediately spoke. "Why, don't tell me you're mad at me. I didn't call because I was in the hospital with asthma and I didn't want to stress you out. I realized that if you knew about it, you'd want to check in and you'd have to go to the other side of town, and I couldn't let that happen. Now tell me about your mother's health. She's all right, isn't she?" It was an ugly thing to do, not reporting her illness. That's not the way to do it. "Mom has already been discharged. My son and I are going to visit her soon." "I hear a note of concern in your voice, which means you've been thinking about me. I am very happy about this fact. I can say with certainty that your image has been haunting me all this time too. Now I have a proposition for you. We'll bury the hatchet right now, and you'll invite me to visit, where we'll have a nice conversation over a cup of tea," Anthony said with a smile. Leslie was so happy to hear the man's voice that she gladly agreed and invited him to visit. Anthony arrived with a bouquet of flowers and a disc of a fantastic movie for Harry. The guest handed the present to the boy and quietly said, "I don't know what they give to guys in such cases, so I brought a disc, really. I don't know if you like this genre or not." "I don't have anywhere to watch it," Harry replied, embarrassed. "I didn't think of that. That's what I was thinking about. That's all right. I'm your guest tonight, and tomorrow I'll invite you to my bachelor pad. That's where you'll watch the movie. How do you like my idea? Said the man. It's up to Mom to decide. I don't make those decisions, said Harry. From that day on, Anthony called Leslie often and inquired about her affairs. The man came to visit occasionally, bringing sweet treats, and soon the woman with her son visited Anthony's house. Time moved forward imperceptibly, and one day the man offered the girl to stay with him for the night. Leslie perfectly understood for what and was ready for this step, as she loved this man with all her heart, and she stayed. Anthony met with the chosen one for 2 months already. He saw that the girl was waiting for a marriage proposal from him. Leslie had hinted at it many times, and when again there was a conversation about further relations, the man said, "You know very well that I loved you, and you're Harry. I consider my son and would be happy if he called me his father. I want very much to create a complete family, but there is one thing that prevents me from doing so, and I can't get cute in front of you right now. Are you married?" "No, sweetheart. I didn't lie to you about that. I told you once that I wanted a family, but it's not working out. So here's the reason. You're a woman and you want to be a mother again soon. But you can't do that with me because I can't be a father for health reasons." "My marriage broke up for that reason too," Anthony said glumly. Leslie, hearing this, put her head down and remained silent for a while. The news shocked her, because she really wanted to become a mother once again from the man she loved. And now, after the revelations of the chosen one, it became clear that it was impossible. The pause lasted for several minutes, and then Leslie looked at Anthony and faintly said, "The fact that you told me the truth, I am grateful to you. Now listen to me. Since you treat Harry like a son, we already have a child together. I realize that you would have wanted your own, but since fate has decided it your way, there's nothing you can do about it. Just know that I love you and I don't want anyone but you. Now, I'd like to know if you'll ask me to marry you or not. I'm asking you to be my wife. Do you accept? I haven't prepared a ring for the occasion, but that's fixable. Tomorrow we'll go to the jewelry store and buy an engagement ring." "It seems to me you've been in the girls," said the lover, who did not expect such words from a woman. He was grateful to her for everything at the moment. Soon the couple signed, and Leslie moved with her son to live with Anthony. Harry Mom's marriage was taken calmly, since the boy liked the man, approved the union of the daughter and Leslie's mother. A few months after the marriage, Anthony once talked to Harry about the church, and the boy told his stepfather that he was not baptized. The man looked at the boy with surprise and then asked his wife why she had not baptized the child until now. Leslie hesitated with an answer and said nothing. And then Anthony suggested the following: "My sunshine, and after all, our son wants to be baptized. Let's arrange it for him. I even have a gift for it." And with these words, the man took out of the dresser a silver cross, which he handed to his wife. Leslie took the jewelry and said with interest, "How massive it is and made in an unusual way. Why don't you wear it?" "I do not like to wear these trinkets. I got the cross from my father, and it's handmade. We'll give it to Harry when he's baptized, but we'll give it to him when he's older. Wouldn't you agree? If you and Harry have already talked about it and come to a common ground, why do you need my consent?" "Of course I don't mind," she said with a smile. A month later, Harry was baptized, and in the church Leslie saw how the husband looks at an unknown couple with a daughter. The woman immediately noted that her husband, seeing how the bishop baptized the baby in a flash, saddened. Leslie realized at that moment that the chosen one dreams of a daughter. When they returned from the christening, the woman, having found the right moment to start a conversation with her husband about children, the man, having heard the topic of conversation, became sad and quietly said, "You told me that we have one son and we do not need anyone else. So why are you talking about it now? I saw your look at the little girl in the church, and I am not a stupid person and understood why you look at her like that. You and I have a way out of this. But I have to talk to my son first, because we have to talk to my son first, because we have to consider his opinion too. What else do you have in mind? The man said, perplexed, and looked seriously at his wife. I propose to take a little girl from the orphanage, but only not very small. I would not like to have a big difference between the children, and let's not put it off for long. I'll talk to Harry tomorrow. I don't think he'll mind, and then we'll go to the orphanage, and then fate will decide who will be our daughter, the woman said with a smile. The man was silent for the first moment, and then he embraced the chosen one and said that he had the best wife in the world and he was proud of it. The next day, Leslie talked to Harry, who was a little confused by the conversation. But soon the boy added that it would be nice if he had a little sister. The woman hugged her son and happily told him that he was growing up a kind and sympathetic person. A few days later, the couple was already at the orphanage and looked at the babies. Leslie was immediately attracted by a girl of 5 years old, who stood apart from the other children and looked at her peers with an adult look. The woman asked the teacher about the girl, and she answered that the child's name was Betty. She had been here for about a month because her mother had been deprived of parental rights, and there were no other relatives. Leslie approached the little girl and greeted her affectionately. The girl responded to the greeting and looked at the woman seriously. Leslie immediately realized that this was the child she wanted to adopt. She even noted that Betty had a mole like Harry's above her right lip. Leslie turned to her husband, and Anthony understood everything without words. The man hugged his wife affectionately and whispered that now it was time to act and gather the proper paperwork for the adoption. The woman handed the sweets to the girl that she and her husband had specially bought and asked the child to share the treat with the other caregivers. And just before leaving, Leslie promised Betty that very soon they would take her to live with them. After a while, the couple adopted the girl. Harry accepted the new member of the family, friendly, and even told his mother that Betty looks like a birthmark on him. The couple, upon hearing their son's reply, happily laughed back. Katie knew about her daughter and son-in-law's decision to adopt a baby girl. And when it happened, the elderly woman heartily congratulated the spouses, and on the first day of acquaintance called Betty her own granddaughter. However, the joy in the family did not last long. 6 months after the adoption of the girl, Leslie's mother died suddenly from a heart attack. The spouses mourned the loss of their loved one. Kathy was buried next to her husband. The pensioner, even during her lifetime, asked her daughter to do so. Time slowly moved on, and soon Harry was 13 years old. And here, Leslie talked to her spouse about expanding the living space. Anthony was surprised by the topic and asked why it was necessary to address this issue now. The spouse sat down opposite her husband and admonishingly said, "Don't you realize that we have different sex children growing up and they should have their own separate room? Harry's a teenager now, and it won't be long before Betty's a teenager. It's just that I have my mother's house in the village, and I need to sell it and spend the money on an apartment swap. We'll live in a 3-room. You and I will be enough living room, and the children will be a room, and I think that this is a good option. Why do we need a house in the country if we're not going to live there? You're so advanced. I'm older than you, but I don't look into the future. It's up to you to decide since the property is yours. You, chameleon, are we going to divide real estate now? We share that house. I just want the children to live comfortably. That's why I suggested this option," the woman said with a laugh. And soon Anthony put the house up for sale. The couple were able to sell the property only 6 months later. And then they found an option with additional payment and exchanged the 2-bedroom apartment for a 2-bedroom apartment for a 2-bedroom apartment. The children were especially happy about this circumstance. Betty was always in her brother's room at first. She was bored without Harry, and he in turn did not oppose it. Time moved on slowly, and the children grew up, and Leslie saw how carefully Harry took care of his sister. The woman at such moments often turned to her husband and said that there was not a single day that she regretted the adoption. The man sincerely supported his spouse and said, "You are the wisest woman in the world and can always find a way out. We did not have a daughter, and now we have a daughter, and all thanks to you. And I see Harry loves his sister too. You and I have wonderful children, and let them grow up to be decent people, so that you and I in the future will not have to blush for them in front of society. Years passed, and Harry graduated from school and entered a higher education institution to study marketing. The guy, while still studying in the 10th grade, chose this specialty. Parents were not against their son's decision. They believed that Harry himself should choose who he wants to be in the future. And now Harry had already finished the 2nd year of study as he came home in a pensive mood. This did not hide from his mother, and she asked her son what was wrong. The boy said he wanted to talk to them today, but without his sister present. Leslie was surprised at this, since Harry never hid anything from Betty. They were very friendly with each other. That evening, the woman called her husband into her son's room. The spouses sat down on the bed, and Leslie asked Harry to begin the conversation. The boy stood silent for a while, and then in one breath blurted out, "Mom and Dad, I'm in love, and today I propose marriage to this girl. She hasn't said yes yet, but I know she will. How do you feel about your son getting married soon?" "It's a big surprise," Anthony said with a laugh, and then added, "It's no secret to me personally that you're in love. You haven't come home several times in the last 2 months. I was the one who covered for you from my mother that you were absent, saying that you were busy with your studies and you should not be disturbed. I just didn't want your mom to worry when you were having affairs and not sleeping at home." Leslie looked at her spouse and then at her son with fake indignation, then couldn't stand it and laughed herself. Her father and Harry looked at the woman in bewilderment, and Leslie laughed even more, seeing the faces of her relatives stretched out in surprise. And only after a few minutes was she able to say, "You're crazy conspirators." Yes, I knew Harry wasn't sleeping over, as I'd been told by Betty, who'd stopped by his room several times at midnight. Yes, only Harry wasn't there. But you have to give the daughter credit. She's a true spy, and she found out that her brother was in love because she found a picture of a girl with an inscription on the back, "Beloved." And I noticed that Harry became mysterious, always hovering in the clouds. And that's a state only lovers have. Harry lowered his eyes to the floor in embarrassment after that message, and then he said in surprise that he hadn't expected his sister to be so quick. His parents laughed when they heard that, and Leslie added that Harry wanted to hide this conversation from his sister, when she already knew everything about everything. And then the woman made a serious expression on her face and asked, "You made a proposal, but you do not want to introduce your wife. And in general you realize that marriage is a serious step, not a giggle." "Mom, I understand all this, and I've been thinking about it for a long time. And before starting this conversation, I thought about it thoroughly. I love this girl, and I want to live with her all my life, for example, as you and Dad live." "Well, son, I like your answer, but I would like to get acquainted with your chosen one before you gallop to the registry office to follow Mendelssohn's waltz," said the mother to her son. After this conversation, a week passed, and Harry announced to his parents that today he would bring his girlfriend to meet him. Leslie scolded her son unmercifully for not giving advance notice of such an event. Harry hugged his mom and said that he didn't want to make a lavish viewing party out of the event. That same day, the introduction took place. Leslie furtively cast furtive glances at the future daughter. The girl, who was called Selina, behaved naturally, which pleased the landlady. The head of the family also looked at the guest and winked at his son in passing. Harry understood his father perfectly well that he approved of his choice. Leslie decided to talk to her husband alone after the meeting. She asked her husband's opinion about the future daughter-in-law, and he replied that at first glance the girl is decent and does not build herself a queen. The wife listened to the answer and fully agreed with the chosen one, and then with a smile said, "Since you and I approved the future relative, it will be necessary to look for money for the wedding. We will have to take someone to take a loan, since we have not saved with you, my dear, and I want to have a wedding that my son will be happy with, so we'll take a loan. Don't worry about money, dear." However, the trip to the registry office had to be postponed, because Selina fell awkwardly on the street and broke her arm. The girl flatly refused to marry in a cast. Leslie perfectly understood the future daughter-in-law who wants to shine in a wedding dress and with a cast on the arm. It's been about a month since Selina broke her arm, and now she removed the cast, and Harry again called his beloved in the registry office. The girl this time again asked for a postponement about the wedding. The whole thing is that her parents wanted to go to the sea and take their daughter with them. Selina was not against this trip, about what her chosen one had told. The young man was upset that the wedding is postponed again. Harry's mother saw that her son comes home forever in a bad mood. She already knew the reason why the guy is upset. The woman tried to calm Harry down with words. "Do not worry so much. Selina does not refuse to marry you, just yourself. Understand, to go to the sea and relax, not every year falls out of luck. Mom, she's going there for a month and I want to be there with her." "What's stopping you from doing that?" Leslie asked, perplexed. "I have a week of school, and Selina leaves the day after tomorrow." "So much for that," Harry said sadly. "That's a problem too. Come to your girlfriend a few days later, and you two can sunbathe in the sun," the mother said to her son. Harry frowned at the floor and said nothing. Leslie asked again what Harry was now unhappy about. The boy quietly said that the trip was a financial issue. The woman caressed her son's wavy bangs and said, "For money, do not worry. We were still going to take a loan for the wedding, and now we will take a little more, with the expectation that you rest, and before the exciting events, and before the next school year." And soon the couple, together with their daughter, saw Harry off to the resort. The woman gave her son instructions before leaving, and the sister asked her brother to bring souvenirs. The head of the family also said a few parting words, and the boy got on the bus afterward. Leslie did not know then that she was seeing her boy off on a sorrowful journey. The woman felt some anxiety in her soul, but she attributed these worries to the fact that she had never been separated from her son for so long. It was a couple days before Harry left. Leslie did not find a place for herself, for the lad had promised to notify her at once on his arrival. The woman's husband saw that the chosen one is not on a joke worried and decided to calm her down. "You're really pissed off, but the guy does not pick up the phone. There is no need to guess. You know he came here, hugged his beloved, and forgot to call his parents. And to keep you and me out of his way, he turned off his phone. Harry will be back online in a day. I don't feel comfortable, honey. I was worried when I saw him off, and now I'm not so worried. Harry couldn't just forget to call us. You know he's a very obliging boy. It'll all work out. As soon as he calls, I'll give him a reprimand for making his mother so worried," he said quietly to his wife and hugged her affectionately, kissing her on the cheek. A couple more days flew by, and Leslie couldn't stand it and called Selina. However, the girl reported that Harry did not come to her. The woman from these words almost dropped the phone. She could not understand where her son at this time. Leslie was going crazy with thoughts that something could happen to her boy, and having waited one more day, appealed to the police with a missing persons report. The woman every day called Selina several times, but the girl herself was at a loss where Harry disappeared. And at the next call, the future daughter-in-law stated to Leslie that her son turned out to be a coward. The interlocutor interrogated Selina, but she hung up. At this conversation was present Betty, who heard everything. The girl asked her mother to calm down and quietly said, "I know why Selina called her brother a coward. Harry told me before he left that his girlfriend was pregnant, and I think she thinks Harry dumped her." "Pregnant how? Why didn't Harry tell me about it?" "But only you," perplexed mother asked her daughter. Leslie at the same moment began to dial Selina again and again on the phone, but the girl dropped the calls. Then the woman sent a text message. "Pick up the phone. I just found out you're pregnant. We need to talk. Realize that Harry loves you very much and would never leave you." After the message, Leslie waited for a response, but nothing came to her. The days flew by and Harry still didn't show up at the resort or at home. Leslie, together with her husband, pounded the doorstep of the police. but their divorced hands. The woman often called Selina, but the girl stubbornly refused to communicate. Leslie felt that she was going crazy with worry for her son. She asked the Almighty to hear her prayers. However, a sorrowful event, despite the prayers, knocked on their apartment. It was a call from the police, where the couple was asked to come to the morgue to identify the young man. When the woman heard the news, she thought that some scoundrel had decided to play a joke on her. But a man's voice in the phone once again repeated what was said. And now Leslie and her husband are in the morgue. In front of them lies a body on a gurney. The pathologist opened the sheet, and the woman shrieked fearfully, and then turned to the investigator standing next to her and said firmly, "This is not my son. I realize that the body is burned and very difficult to identify. But the thing is that they found these two bodies in the car. One of them had a cross on it, and it was quite unusual. You can't buy such a cross in a store. And one more thing, not far from the car there was a bag. There was nothing valuable in it, only a notebook and a photo of a girl, on the back of which is written, 'Beloved.' Look at these things. Do they belong to your son?" said the man in the uniform. Leslie, as in a fog, took the cross. She immediately recognized this jewelry. And then the woman looked at the photograph, which showed a smiling Selina. And only after Leslie opened the notebook, where she immediately recognized her son's calligraphic handwriting, she had noticed how teachers praised Harry for his beautiful handwriting at school. The woman felt faint. She wished now that consciousness would leave her. And when she came to her senses, it would be nothing. Leslie turned to her husband, who stood stone, faced and unable to say anything. Her spouse cried out, and her husband pulled her to him at the same hour, and it was only at that moment that she sobbed desperately in her voice. Anthony led the chosen one out into the corridor, where he sat her down on the couch. The man could not find comforting words for his wife, as he himself had a lump in his throat, which he could not swallow. Soon the investigator approached the couple and handed the sobbing mother a glass of water and politely said, "I realize that now is not the best moment for an interview, but still I wanted to ask a few questions. Let's not do it now. Can't you see that my wife can't even string two words together? Let's reschedule the conversation for another time," Anthony said in a muffled voice. Only the next day Leslie was able to testify how and where her son went, what he had with him. Answering the investigator's questions, the woman involuntarily asked him, "My son ended up in this car with another person in it. How could it be that Harry went from the bus to the car? We're working on it. I can't give you answers right away as it takes time for the investigation. Did your son have any enemies?" "No. Harry is a good and decent man, and he was going to marry Selina after the resort," said the woman, who could barely hold back her sobs. "So you're sure the man in the morgue is your son?" "Harry wore his husband's cross when he turned 18 and never took it off. My husband had given it to me earlier, but we didn't think such a massive cross was appropriate for a boy." The grief-stricken mother sobbed. "I just wanted to say that if you doubt that this is your son, you can conduct an alternative method of identification," said the investigator, and began to give examples of how it can be done. The woman looked at the law enforcement officer in horror and shrieked, "I don't need these alternative methods. I will put my son in the ground, as it should be. And also be sure to find these bastards. I want to look these subhumans in the eyes." A funeral soon followed with many people in attendance. Harry was buried in a closed coffin. At the burial of the young man came and Celine and her parents. The girl stood aside with her hands clasped to her face. To understand that she was crying could only be understood by her shuddering shoulders. When they began to lower the coffin into the pit, then Leslie at that moment screamed and rushed to the coffin. The woman had no sooner taken 2 steps than she fell, unconscious. The husband immediately called an ambulance and the unfortunate mother was hospitalized. Leslie regained consciousness only a few hours later. Near her sat in a flash aged Anthony. The man gently stroked the other half on the arm and asked to hold on. The patient faintly asked what had happened, and her husband replied, "You had a heart attack. You can't worry at all right now. Understand, my dear, that we both lost our boy and we can never get him back. But I'm begging you to hold on, because I can't bear the loss of another loved one. You should know that we have another daughter who needs us very much, so pull yourself together and be strong. Leslie stayed in the hospital for 10 days, during which time her husband and daughter visited her every day. Selina came to see the patient only twice, and all this time she sat and was silent. The patient tried to talk to the girl, but she was like a mouthful of water. After discharge, Leslie went first to the cemetery. Her husband was against the idea, but the woman insisted on her own. As soon as she talked to her son near the grave, she told her husband that now it was necessary to talk to Selina and asked Anthony to accompany her. A short time later, the spouses were sitting at the girl's house visiting. Leslie looked affectionately at her son's beloved and said softly, "You and I have not been able to talk before, but now it must be done. I know that you are carrying Harry's baby under your heart, and this unborn baby is our piece of happiness and memory of Harry." The guests wanted to continue talking as Selina jumped up at the same moment and interrupted her interlocutor in anger. "What do you think I want to be a single mom? I'm not going to have this baby. It would be one thing if Harry was alive, but he's not. Don't tell me now that I'm carrying a piece of your son and tell me I have to have it. Stop it, girl. What are you talking about? Are you really going to abort the pregnancy?" With bewilderment asked Leslie, who did not believe what she had just now heard. "You have understood everything perfectly. I do not need this child. I'm not ready to raise him alone. I've got my whole life ahead of me, and I'm not going to ruin it." "But Harry said you loved him, and now you're saying such terrible things," said Leslie, confused. "I don't need to be conscious. I've already decided everything, and I don't want to change anything. Please don't come to me again. I sympathize with you very much. You lost your son. I lost my beloved man. But now our paths have diverged, and you know why." The girl shouted hysterically. "You had no feelings for our son, as a loving woman would try to keep a piece of her lover. Well, I will not press you since you have already made up your mind. We are leaving with my husband and will not bother you," the guest said quietly and got up from the chair. The couple returned home in silence. Leslie, after talking to the girl, was exhausted both physically and mentally. The husband saw that his wife was depressed and wanted to support her, as she interrupted him with words. "We have to talk to Selina again. We need to talk her into carrying the baby, and then we'll adopt it. It's the best option for the continuation of the family. Honey, there's no way that girl's going to go for that. You've seen how adamantly Selina is against this pregnancy. You have to accept it, but we should at least try to talk to her. At least offer her some money. We took out a loan for the wedding, so we should use it. I know our son would approve because he's been dreaming of this child. Betty told me everything, and even that Harry wanted the first boy," said the wife stubbornly, and at the same moment asked her husband to turn the car around and return to her son's girlfriend. Anthony saw that there was no point in contradicting his wife at the moment, and complied with Leslie's request. The girl, when she saw that Harry's parents had arrived, angrily asked what they wanted this time. Leslie outlined her offer in a confident voice, and in doing so did not forget to mention the reward. Selina gave the guests a scornful look and replied, "You better pay me moral damage, not offer money for the birth of a child. I've already told you my decision, and I'm not going to spoil my figure. I realize that my words may sound insulting from the outside, but they are true. I have nothing more to talk to you about." And with these words, the girl closed the door in front of the couple. Leslie stood at a loss. She had not expected such a reception. And at the same moment the woman began to sob. She began to pound hysterically at the door with her fists. Anthony grabbed his wife and pressed her tightly against him. He understood that now the beloved person was experiencing a strong shock, and he was also afraid for his wife's sick heart, because his doctor warned that any excitement for Leslie could turn into a heart attack. Anthony with difficulty took his wife out of the entrance and put her in the car. The man started the engine of the car and tried to drive away from Selina's house as soon as possible, and Leslie, covering her face with her hands, continued to sob hysterically. Arriving home, Anthony immediately gave his wife a sedative, and only after that his wife was able to relieve nervous tension. An hour later, Leslie again turned to her spouse about Selina. The head of the family hugged his wife and promised to talk to the girl again, but not today. The woman breathed a sigh of relief. She still had hope that she and her husband would be able to persuade Selina to give birth to a baby. If Leslie believed in it, Anthony had no illusions about it. Despite the fact that the man did not believe that he could convince the girl, he still went to her a day later. Harry's father did not immediately start a conversation about the pregnancy. He initially tried to make Selina to himself, but the interlocutor took every word he said in the bayonet. And literally after 15 minutes of conversation, the girl in a rather rude form said, "What are you going around and around? I understand perfectly well why you are here. Only I have already told you that I will not give birth. In a day, I have to go to the hospital, and I ask you very much not to rub my nerves. So there's no way to change your mind?" "No," said the girl, and then asked the guests to leave the apartment. Anthony drove home after the conversation depressed, because he knew that his wife was waiting for his return and hoped that he was able to persuade Selina. The man, as he thought, only he should have entered the apartment, as Leslie immediately rushed to him to meet him. The head of the family looked sadly at his wife, and she immediately understood everything without words. The woman leaned powerlessly against the door jamb and closed her eyes. Anthony anxiously approached his wife and asked how she felt, but the answer to him was silence. Then the man hugged Leslie and quietly said, "You, my dear, be strong. I know that now we feel bad because to survive their own child for parents, it is the most real grief. But believe me, our son, seeing how you are suffering now, would not approve of your behavior. So please, let's be strong for our children." Years went by. Betty grew up, and Leslie still often visited the police to find out if they found those scoundrels. However, law enforcement officials in response only waved their hands and said that they were working. Her husband often said to his wife that it was useless to visit the investigator, as most likely the case on his son put away in a distant box. And here came the birthday of her daughter. She was 19 years old, and the woman went to her son's room, where she indulged in memories, holding in her hands Harry's favorite collection of poems. The woman was interrupted from her musings by the voice of her daughter, who peeked in on her mother. Betty said softly, "Mommy, it's probably time to go out into the living room now, as the guests are gathering. You don't forget that today is my birthday and I am turning 19. "Yes, daughter, I'm coming. I was just thinking a little bit and lost track of time. Come on, my dear. We need something to keep our guests busy so they don't get bored. Mommy, our neighbor Aunt Mady came, and also your friend Aunt Rita. She brought an incredibly large bouquet of white roses and a cute stuffed toy, as if I were a little girl. And now my friends have called and said they'll be here any minute. So reminiscence night is cancelled for the moment," said Betty affectionately, who had been accustomed for several years that her mother often came to this room on the day of the holidays to reminisce about her life. Leslie rose obediently and followed her daughter out to the guests. Her husband immediately rushed to her, who kissed her tenderly, and from behind took out 2 bouquets of roses, one of which he gave to his daughter and the other to his wife. Leslie greeted the guests and sat down at the table. Soon Betty's girlfriends and friends arrived, who had gotten used to having a separate place set aside for the deceased Harry all the time. All those present sat down, and the head of the family filled shots from a bottle of white and just wanted to make a toast as the doorbell rang. The birthday girl looked at the guests and noted for herself that all the guests she had invited had arrived. The girl shrugged her shoulders and went to open the door. As soon as she opened the door, she saw an unfamiliar, older woman who said their last name. Betty replied with surprise that they were the ones who lived here. The guest, at the same moment, held out a bouquet of flowers and a small velvet box and said quietly, "I can ask you to close the front door and talk to me on the landing." The girl was astonished at the stranger's request, but agreed. As soon as Betty closed the door as a man came up the stairs to her, she looked at the young man and fell into a stupor, because in front of her stood her brother, but only more matured. The girl covered her mouth with the palm of her hand in horror to keep from screaming. Betty couldn't believe her eyes and thought it was just a man who looked like her brother. For several minutes she could not utter a word, and then the silence was broken by a stranger who said, "Betty, I called you specifically to talk separately from your parents, as I realize that it will be a shock to them to see the living son they buried a few years ago." "Yes, we buried Harry 5 years ago," she said with horror, still in shock. "I understand how difficult it is for you to accept the reality of the events. But please listen to me. The fact is, your brother is standing in front of you, and I would like you to prepare your mom and dad for the meeting." The stranger began to say as she was interrupted by a girl who rushed to Harry's neck with the words, "Brother, you're alive. This can't be happening. We buried you, and twice a year we go to see you at the cemetery with your parents. How can I understand all this? Quiet, Dashenka. You're going to stir up the whole house, and you shouldn't do that. Not everyone has a healthy heart," the young man said faintly, but the girl did not hear him and only repeated loudly his name. The head of the family came out at his daughter's voice and only wanted to ask his daughter what was going on here, as he also froze in confusion. The man saw his daughter hugging a young man who looked like 2 drops, like the son they had buried long ago. Harry stood and did not know how to react to this situation, and then he gently pushed his little sister away and said, "Hiya, Dad. I'm back. Believe me, but I'm alive." At that moment, the landlord just stood silent as a statue and did not even make an attempt to hug Harry. He, like Betty, could not believe what was happening. He was horrified, for he and Leslie had buried their son a few years before, and now he was standing before him alive and unharmed. Harry, as if he had read his father's thoughts, and said quietly, "Father, I am. We just need to get Mom ready for the meeting. I'll try to tell everything, and now help me." And before the young man had time to say it, as Leslie came out into the corridor, who said, "What a jumble. There are guests waiting," and with these words rushed to embrace Harry. The woman was not at all surprised at the arrival of her son. She just kissed him and stroked his hair, cheeks, shoulders, and at the same time said, "You're back, my dear. And I waited for you all these years, I don't even know why. Even though I buried your body in a damp grave. Let's go, darling. Today your sister's 19th birthday is today, and we have guests waiting for us. There's always a chair by the table for you because we're waiting for you." "Mom, just calm down," Harry said in a broken voice, who was now amazed at his mother's reaction. His greatest fear had been that his mother wouldn't be able to accept his resurrection from the other side of the world, and she might have a heart attack. But here was a completely different situation. It was as if his mother was actually waiting for him. Meanwhile, Leslie dragged her son by the sleeve into the apartment, followed by the stranger, Betty, and the head of the family. And when they entered the living room, all the guests who saw who entered did not hold back their tears. Those present in the living room were silent and watched Harry sit down on the chair, which every year his mother put for him at any celebration. At the same time, Leslie fussily slid cold appetizers to her son and continued to whisper softly, "Alive, my darling." Back home, when the first emotions passed, Harry pointed to the woman who had come with him and faintly muttered that it was only because of her that he could now breathe, walk, and generally live. The stranger heard the young man's phrase and jokingly threatened him with her index finger. But Anthony did not stop there, as he saw that his relatives and guests were waiting for his story. The man gently stroked his mother's hand and kissed her palm, and only then he started his story. He said at once that he could not tell much because he did not remember everything. Everyone froze at Harry's words, waiting for his story, and the man began to speak. "As soon as I said goodbye to my parents and sister, I got on the bus to get to the city where my fiancée was waiting for me. I wanted the time to go faster, so I pulled out a detective. However, I didn't feel like reading a book, so I started looking out the window. After a while, I was approached by a man who politely asked me where I was going. A conversation ensued between us. We talked for about an hour, when suddenly this new acquaintance grimaced with pain in his stomach. I asked how I could help. He asked me to hitchhike home to his town. I offered to drive to the nearest village and go to the hospital there. However, the man refused to do so, saying that this happens to him often, and it would be faster to get to our town. And he added that he has a sister who knows what to do in such cases, and he made a call to his relative. The new acquaintance promised a reward for his help, which I, of course, refused, and at the same moment he groaned even more. Someone present offered pills. The man did not refuse, and again asked me to escort him back home. I was embarrassed to refuse, so I agreed. The driver made a stop, and we got out. At the same moment, I saw a car parked nearby, rushed to the car and asked the driver to give us a ride to the city, describing the situation with my traveling companion. The driver nodded without turning his head. He didn't even tell me how much he had to pay for the service. It didn't seem strange to me at the time. I only noticed that there was another passenger in the back seat. He looked away when I looked at him, and the next thing I knew, it was like a cheap action movie. I shouted to the new acquaintance to follow me. The man staggered away slowly, and I thought that now I would make an agreement with the driver to give my traveling companion a ride to the city without me, and I would continue my route by hitchhiking. And if I was lucky, I would catch up with my bus and get into it. And only I turned to the driver of the car, I suddenly received a blow on the head, and further I do not remember anything. And I can say with certainty that if not for the help of one kind-hearted woman, I would never have seen all of you. Further, my story can be told by my savior, whose name is Ariana. And with these words, Harry pointed to the companion with whom he came. Everyone in the room looked at the guest, who sat silently, twirling her fork in thought. Ariana was quietly called out by Harry. The woman looked at him with a smile, and he in turn said that he had told his part of the story, and now it was her turn. The guest sighed and looked towards Harry's mother, who was wiping away tears. Ariana smiled at Leslie and began the narration. I've been hearing Harry praise me, but it's unnecessary. He should be thankful to himself for striving to live when all the doctors couldn't wait to get him back on his feet. But I'll start with the main thing. I work as a doctor in a hospital, and a young man was brought to our department in extremely serious condition. He had a head injury. As you can already guess, it was Harry, and I'll say right away that he had no documents with him. Harry was unconscious for several days and then fell into a coma. Our medical staff had already despaired that the guy would make it, and were preparing to disconnect the guy from the life support machine. You must realize that keeping a person alive in this way is very expensive, and no one was paying for it. So the question of disconnection came up. But then a miracle happened. I can't call it any other way. Harry came to his senses, and with each passing day his condition began to stabilize. Soon he regained consciousness and was moved to a regular ward, which I was in charge of. I can't say why I started treating him special. Probably because the guy couldn't remember anything about his life, but he tried his best to do so. After a while, Harry made a full recovery and was about to be discharged. And this is where I started to worry about him, because he was basically like a child, because he didn't know anything about himself. And if he was discharged, he would either go to a homeless shelter or just end up on the street, where he would become homeless. And I couldn't let that happen. So I decided to take him in. I can also explain my act, why I did it. In my life, too, there was a sad event. A little over a year ago, my son drowned. And it is possible that I introduced Harry as my boy, who by chance had to be left without support. And that's how Harry came to be with me. And then began the laborious work of restoring his memory. I won't load you with medical terms, but simply say that he and I worked at it for quite a long time. I had to take Harry to various specialists, and soon the first results came. And then day after day we kept working on his memory. And eventually the picture came together piece by piece. There are still small nuances that Harry can't remember, but they are very minor, and it's a matter of time. I think that now that he's in his father's house, his memory will be fully restored to the smallest details. And now we are at your place, or rather, the son came home and I came to visit. Well, that's basically my story. And I'll tell you right away that you should not thank me for anything. You will just offend me in this way. Don't forget that I'm a doctor, and my specialty is to help people. And after that, the woman was silent and again looked at her ward with a smile. After Ariana's story, Harry's mother rushed over to her and fell to her knees, kissing the woman's hands. The guest couldn't stand it and wept and tried to lift Leslie off her lap while saying, "Please calm down. Everything is behind you and your son is with you. You have done a miracle. If not for you, there is no telling what would have happened to our boy. There are very few people like you to take care of an unknown person like that. I'm asking you to calm down. Don't forget that today you have a double holiday, the return of the prodigal son and the birthday of your daughter. And let's celebrate all these two events," said the guest with tears in her eyes, and immediately turned to Betty. "Have you looked at your present from your brother? Harry chose these earrings himself. He told me that you prefer silver jewelry, so he chose earrings made of this metal. Try them on, please. Do your brother a favor." Betty, who was holding the box in her hands, rushed to the mirror in the hallway. The girl carefully took out the earrings and put them on, then went into the hall and said, "I like this jewelry very much. Brother, I am grateful to you and to you, Ariana." With these words, Betty first of all hugged her brother and then the guest. After that, the discussion of what happened with Harry began. The boy's parents kept thanking Ariana for their son. They were ready to idolize this woman who saved Harry. And the guest, in response, only said that the ward pulled himself out of the other world. Soon the celebration of the two events ended, and the guests dispersed. Leslie politely offered Ariana to stay with them and put her son's room at her disposal. And Harry laughingly said at that moment that he only had to spend the night in the kitchen. However, the sister threatened her brother and called to her she wanted to still whisper with Harry when the guest and the children went to bed, the spouses secluded in the kitchen. Leslie turned to her husband, asking what Ariane needed. Some way to thank him. The man nodded in response and asked how to do it, so as not to offend the woman. The wife thought about it and said, "We need to find out from Harry what Ariana is fond of, and then already think about what we can give. And I have one more question for you. I'm afraid that my son will ask about Selena. He knows that she was pregnant. What will we tell him? Truth, sweetheart? We can't hide it now. He needs to know that girl didn't really love him, and we won't hurt him. What if it provokes memory loss?" The wife said uncertainly. "We'll ask Ariana tomorrow. She's a doctor and she'll tell us the right answer. And now let's go to bed because it's late and we've been nervous enough today," said the man affectionately to his wife. At that moment, Betty was talking to her brother. They recalled their childhood, how they were mischievous and their mother, trying to be serious, scolded them. Brother and sister talked for a long time as suddenly Harry said, "I can't wait to hear about Selena." It was awkward to ask in front of guests. "Who did she give birth to?" "I've been waiting for that question for a long time." "What can I tell you?" "That girl didn't love you at all. Selena had an abortion right after your funeral. Her mother and father urged her not to, but she said she didn't want to be a single mom. And her mother even offered her to give birth to a baby and then take the child away from her to bring up themselves. But your wife said she didn't want to ruin her figure. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but it's better for you to know the truth now than to hope for something," said Betty. The boy, after his sister's words, hesitated. Betty looked at her brother with participation. She felt that she hurt him with her words. But the girl didn't want to lie to Harry either. And when the pause dragged on, the sister quietly said, "It's hard for you now, but what should I have told you in this case? You did everything right. Sis, and I am grateful to you for that. I'll get over it. The main thing is that we are together again. There are a lot of girls in the world. I looked at your friends today. They are beautiful, but you, of course, are the most beautiful," said Harry. "You're a good-looking man, though, aren't you?" said Betty, laughing. The next day, Harry asked his parents about the burnt car and his alleged corpse. Leslie told his son everything thoroughly about her trips to the police and how the case was progressing. The young man listened to his mother and asked, "Who was the second person killed?" "Son, we were told that it is an unknown person." Leslie said sadly, "Well then, I'm going to the police today, because I'm alive and we need to reopen the case." "Such acts cannot be left unpunished," the son said sternly. And soon he, led by his parents and Ariana, was sitting in the investigator's office, where he reported that he had been resurrected and how it had happened. The law enforcement officer initially listened to the young man, and then already his savior. Investigator Max, after the story, nervously scratched the bridge of his nose. He did not expect such a turn of events. The man then asked a lot of questions to Harry, to which he answered thoroughly. And then the investigator questioned Ariana once more. And only then did he say, "Well now, your testimony makes a great deal of difference. And I think we'll solve this crime very soon. We now need to know who was buried instead of you, as well as the identity of the second person who was buried as a homeless person. We'll have to do an exhumation. It's the only way we can. Shed light on this confusing case." Harry listened to the investigator and asked to be kept in the loop if possible. Max smiled at the young man and explained that as soon as the crime was solved, he would notify Harry himself, but at the moment the law enforcement officer was not authorized to publicize the progress of the investigation in the interest of the case. A few days passed as Harry returned home, and Ariana scrambled to get home. Just before she left, Leslie held out an envelope of money to the woman and asked her to accept it. The guest became angry and said sternly that she did not take a fee for her work. Leslie cried and only asked, "But how can we thank you? Believe me, my husband and I want to do it from the bottom of our hearts, but we do not know how. I don't need your gratitude, but I will ask you for one thing. I've grown very fond of your boy over the years. He's been like a son to me. Let Harry visit me once in a while. It would be a pleasure. That would be my greatest gratitude. One more thing. Can I call you? It seems to me that we're not strangers now. Of course, call as often as you can, and come and visit. We'll always be glad to see you. And Harry will come to you because he has accepted you with all his heart," she said with tears in her eyes. 2 months passed after Harry's return. The young man soon returned to the institute and continued his studies. When Harry was returning from his studies, he suddenly stopped. He looked at a young woman with a stroller, and it seemed to him that it was Selena. The man called out softly to the girl, and she turned around. Harry was actually not mistaken. It was his ex-fiancée. The young woman looked fearfully at the young man and couldn't say anything. Harry approached the girl and greeted her, but his answer was silence, as Selena couldn't say anything. She was in a daze. The man clearly realized that he had shocked the young woman, and so he said quietly and clearly, "It is actually me, but only alive and unharmed. Let's step aside and talk, if you want to, of course." The girl, who still hadn't recovered from the shock, agreed, nodded. They walked a little way down the street and wrapped up in the park, where they sat down on a bench. Harry leisurely told Selena what had happened to him, and then pointed to the baby and asked, "Is that your baby?" "Yes, that's my daughter Julianne. She'll be 2 soon. A little over a year after you were buried, I got married, but rather unsuccessfully. After the birth of my daughter, my husband strayed, and now we're in the middle of a divorce. He's going to his mistress, and I have no chance of stopping him. I don't even know how to live alone now with a baby in my arms. It's very sad. I'm sorry to hear about your situation, but you still have your whole life ahead of you. You will definitely organize your personal life. And believe me, the baby won't be a hindrance," Harry said quietly. "Maybe you and I could meet again and try to start over. Maybe it's not too late." The young woman asked, "Don't you and I parted like ships at sea. You made your choice a long time ago, when my parents asked you to have a child and give it to them to raise. I don't think we need to go on about that. But I'm glad I saw you, and I'm glad you've learned the role of motherhood, but it's sad that it didn't work out with your husband," the man said, rising quickly from the bench and heading away from Selina. Harry walked on and didn't even think about turning around, even though he subconsciously knew that his former lover was waiting for him. When he got home, his son told his mother about his meeting with Selina. Leslie, after hearing this, thought about it, and then told Harry that it was probably the Almighty who taught the other lesson, and also added that she felt sorry for this person and sincerely wished her only happiness in the future, but not with her son. Harry, as soon as he heard this, then said, "Selina is a past stage in life. I realized that she did not love me, and I am grateful to my sister that Betty informed me everything without secrecy and without embellishments. And you, Mammy, do not worry. You will still have grandchildren. But I do not know who will be the first to give you this happiness, me or my sister. I look at Betty and wonder what a beauty she's become. She must have lots of suitors." "Oh, you're a joker, my son," said his mother with a smile. Time moved forward slowly, and Harry was sitting at home when his cell phone rang. The man looked at the number and was surprised to see that it was an investigator calling him. Harry answered and heard that the caller was inviting him to come to the police station tomorrow for an interesting conversation. Harry asked what the conversation would be about, but Max laughed and promised that he would tell him everything interesting when he met him. Harry was intrigued and was looking forward to tomorrow to find out what he was called to the police for. And here he is already sitting in the investigator's office and looking at the law enforcement officer with interest. Max did not bother the guy and said, "Your case is solved, and as promised, I will tell you everything. I think you will be curious to know. I listened to you attentively. You intrigued me yesterday," said the interlocutor. The investigator sat down comfortably, poured himself a glass of water, and drained it in a gulp, and only then began his story. "The thing is that you, as a victim still outlined then, as you and your parents said goodbye at the bus station. The trio of bandits saw how your mother handed you a bag of money. It is not difficult to guess it was finances, as you immediately hurried to hide them in a purse. The criminals have their eyes set on it, and they guess that you put the money away. One of the crooks got on the bus and then got onto you, where he played the stomachache. You, as a decent citizen, fell for it. Then a call was made to your sister, where the criminal informed his accomplices that you fell for the trick. The criminal noticed the car of his buddies from afar, and again played the show that he was getting worse. And then, as you told me at the time, everything happened like in action movies. You saw the car and asked for a ride. But I will not retell your story. In general, you were given a crushing blow to the head, and then your body was thrown into a ravine, having previously searched you. The intruders took your bag with your personal belongings and your purse. Then one of the bandits saw a chain with a cross around your neck, which he immediately took off and put on himself. Eventually, they got into a car and drove away from the scene of the crime. After a while, the trio had a falling out, and it was over money, but not yours. You didn't have that much. Just before attacking you, intruders robbed a store in a neighboring town and got a good profit. And it was this profit that caused a quarrel between the accomplices. As a result, one of the bandits stabbed one accomplice, and then the second, and to cover his tracks, doused the car with gasoline and set it on fire. So the man with your cross was in the passenger compartment of the car, and the one who set fire to the car took your bag from the purse, took the finances and your passport, and then dumped the purse not far from the car. Your mother recognized you from the notebook and the photo and the cross. Wait, but how did you find the third bandit who did all this? Perplexed, Harry asked, who was stunned at how easily he had been led by the criminals. Max smiled back and asked his interlocutor not to interrupt during the narration. Harry was embarrassed after the investigator's words and apologized and asked to continue the story. The law enforcement officer leaned his hands on the table and with an important look spoke further. After the perpetrator set the car on fire, then he tried to get lost in another city, and we were unable to find him as there were very few leads. And then your unexpected resurrection and story. Naturally, the question arose at once, who is buried instead of you? And that's why we did the exhumation. Wait, Harry said hotly, and then quickly continued speaking. Why didn't you do it earlier? There was another body in the car. I understand that my mother misidentified me, but the other person was not identified. You're so meticulous. I told you not to interrupt. We all make mistakes. So I'll continue with your permission. In general, instead of you buried a bandit. Our experts determined that the second man from the car also turned out to be a criminal. And further, the investigation began to study their cases and suddenly came to the third participant of the crime. Here I will not disclose the cards to you. As soon as the intruder was caught, as they say, he was pressed against the wall. Here, he told about the robbery of the store, the attack on you, as well as the murder of his accomplices and the burning of the car. Now we've got a written confession and a trial coming up, and this bandit will get the full measure for all the committed atrocities. Joyfully finished the narration, Max, and immediately making a serious face, said, And for the future citizen, be vigilant. It is necessary to gather at home and not in front of the bus to hide money in plain sight. If you hadn't waved the envelope, this wouldn't have happened to you. Harry only wanted to tell the investigator about the faults of the investigation, which could have been excluded, and then his mother would have found her son sooner, because she knew that he was not in the car. But the man did not do this. He kept these thoughts to himself and said aloud, Well, thank you for your work, and then left Max's office. At home, Harry told the family about his conversation with the investigator. Leslie shook her hands and wailed that it was all her fault. The son hugged his mother and said that it wasn't her fault, and then added, Even after burying me, you were subconsciously waiting for me all the time. It was not for nothing that you put a chair for me at every celebration, and you see I came back. Don't blame yourself, my dear. Let's have some tea on this occasion. After all, the culprit has been found and will be punished according to the law. A couple of years passed. All this time, Harry often visited Ariana and also called her. And soon a man came home with a pretty girl, whom he introduced to his parents as his bride. Leslie was delighted with her son's chosen one and only mumbled, Now you young people have to please me and my father with grandchildren, and we will be even happier. After these words, the doorbell rang. Betty ran to open it, and after a few minutes she entered the hall with a young man, and then the girl mysteriously said, My dear parents, there's more good news for you today. My fiancé has come to ask you to marry him, and we very much hope for your blessing, though you can't refuse us, as I was quicker than my brother and will give you a granddaughter or a grandson. Parents looked at each other in bewilderment, and Leslie looked at her daughter. And at the same moment, Harry's deafening laughter sounded. The couple now looked at their son incomprehensibly, and as soon as he stopped laughing, he said, That's Betty well done. Surpassed her brother. And you said that you share everything with me, and such news is silent. I'll give you 5 points. You're a smart one. You'll put anyone under your belt. I always tell you everything. I just found out I'm pregnant today. And I have a proposal to you, and let's apply together in the registry office to celebrate the wedding with a big one day. It would be more fun and more economical. Do you all think that my proposal is worth discussing, or do you all unanimously support it? After all these statements, the parents smiled and kindly scolded the children. And then Leslie turned to all the young people. You have put me and my father in front of the fact today, but there is no way out if you have found your soulmates. Dad and I can only say love and advice to you. And I would like to add that I like Betty's proposal. And Harry, you need to catch up with your sister so that your future wife can tell me this year that she is also in an interesting position. Oh, and I almost forgot to tell you, call Ariana and tell her what you two have been up to. Maybe she'll scold you more harshly than your father and I did. By the way, I spoke to her today, and she's coming to visit us as soon as possible. And then Betty's fiancé suddenly asked a question. I apologize, but who is Ariana? Betty had told me about you, but she hadn't told me about this woman. Betty looked at her brother and asked for permission to answer. Harry smiled and nodded his head. The girl turned to her fiancé and said, "This woman saved my brother's life. We are eternally grateful to her, and that's why we, along with Harry, consider her our second mom. And our parents know this and are supportive of it. So you two, our other halves, will have to get another mom, and it's out of the question." After Betty's statement, everyone laughed. Leslie hugged everyone in turn and invited them to the table for tea. While drinking the aromatic drink, the doorbell rang again. Betty looked around in surprise and said, "I'm not expecting anyone else today. I'm going to open the door." A few moments later, everyone heard Betty's joyful cry. Everyone immediately rushed into the hallway, where they saw Betty hugging Ariana. Leslie looked at the woman in bewilderment and said, "You said you were just getting ready and you're already standing here." "No, today is a day of surprises. I must have missed something." "Oh, tell me what else happened besides me showing up on the doorstep." "Wait, I think I have an idea. I see new faces, and I think they're the future soulmates of our children." "Am I right or am I wrong?" said Ariana, smiling happily. "Of course you're right. How can I keep anything from you? You must have sensed that a great change was coming. That's why you showed up so suddenly. But there's something you still don't know, namely, that Betty has outdone me and is in a very exciting position. But my fiancé and I assure you, our parents, that in the near future we will also announce the arrival of an heir," Harry said happily, hugging Ariana. Soon, 2 weddings were held with many people present. The newlyweds smiled happily at their other halves and accepted congratulations from those present. After the wedding, it was decided that Harry and his wife would move to live, as he finished his studies to Ariana, and Betty and her husband would stay with Leslie. And even after a while, Beatty gave birth to a daughter whom she named after her mother. Leslie, and Harry and his wife fulfilled their promise. They had a boy. He was named after his grandfather, Anthony.